All right, it is so good to be back with you today, and we are off-roading on our study 66. As you know, we are going through the Bible, calling that study 66 books in the Bible, and we are going through each one of those. And we get together and do this special little feature where we call it off-road, and hopefully bringing to something of interest or whatever we want to do when it comes to these books. And so we will be looking this particular week coming up on Sunday. We will be in First and possibly Second Kings, debating that right now, but you'll know where we are. And today we're going to kind of pick up a little bit where Second Samuel left off, and this is where Israel is united. What a beautiful thing, right? They're united under David's rule and reign. And while David had the speed bumps, and we know what they are, let's just name one of them Bathsheba, and counting and doing the census and everything else, David, his kingdom would be known as righteous. And of course, God looked fondly on David because of David's heart. And so we see that happening. Now, of course, David would have a son by Bathsheba, and that son would be known as Solomon, is who he would be known as. And he rules after David is what he's going to do. And Solomon is blessed with what? Well, he's blessed with great wisdom. And it would be Solomon that builds the majestic temple. And if you ever want to read something really, really cool, read about the dedication and the prayer that Solomon prays at the dedication. Now, David would be the guy that wanted to build this temple, but because he was a man of war, bloodshed, he wasn't allowed to. But we do know he accumulated everything, put it all together, laid out the plans, and Solomon would be the guy that kind of executes those plans and that which goes along with that. And so Solomon, while a tremendous king to start off things with, we can see that there would be some problem a little bit later. He starts off faithful to God, asks for the wisdom. God gives him that wisdom. But eventually Solomon, unfortunately, because of the influences in his life, what were those influences? Well, all the concubines, all the wives and so forth that he would allow to come into his courts, and he would mingle basically with them, influenced by them, listening to the way they served their gods. He eventually would start, I guess maybe a good word to use there is to say he cavorted with those gods. He allowed himself to be seduced by those gods, and unfortunately it would pay off terrible dividends later. We know that Solomon not only fell for those gods, but Solomon would also start building temples and places of worship to those foreign gods. Here you have this man involved with the building of the temple to the only God, the just God, would offer up one of the most beautiful prayers to that God, and yet it wouldn't take long for him to be seduced into following these other gods and building temples to these other gods. So you can see how tragic that really is and what happened. And so what would happen, unfortunately, is after Solomon is unfaithful to the true and the living God, when his rule ends, when Solomon passes away, we know that the kingdom then would be divided after his death. The northern 10 tribes would follow Solomon's former warrior, as you would know him, and of course that's Jeroboam. And the tribes of Judah and Benjamin would remain loyal to David's throne for a while longer, but they too would eventually, unfortunately, give way to worshiping other gods. And each one, when they did this, unfortunately, they wouldn't last. The northern kingdom ends up going, the northern kingdom, which of course is Israel, the northern kingdom is Israel. And when you read in the scriptures, this is an important part. When you read in the scriptures, understand you'll read Israel, then you'll read Judah. And you're like, well, which is it? Is it Israel? Is it Judah? What's going on? Well, Israel are the northern tribes, the 10, and Judah would be the southern tribes. And so when you read Israel, when you read Judah, understand that's what you're looking at, and that's how they both, unfortunately, would be divided. We know that Both are taken captive by Israel or by enemy nations. Israel would be taken captive by Assyria. Judah would fall into Babylonian hands, is what would go on there. And this is exactly what God had promised when he said, as for you, if you will walk before me as your father David walked in integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, just as I promised to your father David, saying, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons turn away from following me and don't keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and the house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast from or out of my sight. And so the books of of the Kings, by the way, First and Second King were just called the Kings at that time. In fact, Chronicles was the same way. It was just basically the Acts of the Kings is what it was. It wouldn't be until you get into the Vulgate and these other things, the Greek rendition of the Old Testament, that you would find these things being broken apart. So the books of the Kings were probably written during the time of Judah's captivity, which would be in Babylon. And if you remember that, this begins at the end of the Second King. So anyway, just so you have an idea of where that is and what it is. We know the temple of God would be destroyed is what would happen. Jerusalem would be left in ruins, and the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and some of the Levites were seeking a pagan king in a faraway country. So you can see what was going on at this time. How did all this come to be? How did all this happen? And it would be because of whom they were worshiping, whom they were going after, whom they were trying to follow. You see, they had forgotten to worship the Lord. They had forgotten to go after the true king and to seek him. So anyway, that's all important stuff. And by the way, this coming Sunday, we are going to be speaking on one of my favorite characters in the Bible, someone that I think is just an amazing person. And that person's name, of course, is Naaman. Now, Naaman is important because Naaman teaches us a couple things. One, we want to and we need to learn to trust God. Now, Naaman was the captain of the armies of Syria, is what he was. And so he was an important man, and he was a favorable, he was an honorable man, the scripture says. Yet he ended up with leprosy, and then his ordeal begins. But what do we learn from this man? Do we trust God? How do we trust God? And so if you're in church on Sunday, you will find out exactly what that's about. And what do we do to learn to trust God more in the circumstances that we have? And so between now and Sunday, I hope you will read this wonderful book, and even these two books is what I want you to do. How does this all relate to us? How did 1st and 2nd Kings relate to us? Well, it exposes to us just how far mankind in relationship to God can fall. Stop and think about it. Even people that are serving the Lord one day can trip and stumble and fall. King Solomon was a man that was absolutely blessed by the Lord, but he allowed what? Compromise to ruin him is what he did. And so most of the kings after Solomon would do the same thing. They would be compromisers. They would fail miserably in serving God, and certainly not with all their hearts, not with all their minds and all their strength. And so what did it do? Consequently, it brings down the nation is what it did. And this is a sad reminder on the priority that you and I need to have in our lives, to focus on the things of the Lord, to follow His word, to be obedient at all costs. Even when everything and everyone around you is trying to persuade you from walking away, that's not what you need to do, that's for sure. And so we need to take the opportunities to please the Lord in the things that we're doing, because the consequences in going the other way obviously would not be favorable to us. And so these books provide an interesting perspective of how God's hand is clearly involved in moving the nations around and to achieve his purposes. See, that's what we see here. We talked last week out of the book of Esther on the difference between sovereignty and providence. Sovereignty is basically that God is the creator of all things, so he owns all things. Remember, God owns all things. He is sovereign. His reign is sovereign. It's over all. Having providence means that God can do what he wants. Since he created it all, he owns it all. So in his providence, he can move things around the way he wants to. Supernaturally, God can do things. Often we read in the scriptures, many times we see in the things around us, miraculous things happening. That's because God is using his providential rights because he's created to do what he wants. It's kind of like you and I, if we create a piece of art, create a work of art or something like that. Well, if it's ours and we created it, then we get to do what we want with it. Technically speaking. So you and I, being the creator of something, we have the right to say, hey, I should be able to do this. This leads us into an interesting little bit of an argument, and that is, have we created ourselves or has God created us? If you are a believer that God created you and God has created me, then he has the sovereign rule over our lives, and he can providentially move you and I where he wants, when he wants. So we can't shake our fist and say, God, how come you're doing this? I don't like it. I want to go that way. What happens then is that's called rebellion. And when you enter into rebellion, you're stepping out from underneath the umbrella of God's protection. Yeah, that's what it's like. So it's pouring rain. A few days ago, we had all that rain coming down. I had to do a funeral. And so I have my trusty umbrella with me. I'm in my suit jacket and a pair of slacks and a pair of shoes, standing out in the cemetery. Yet I was still able to stay relatively dry. Why? Because I had an umbrella over me. You see, once I stepped out from underneath that umbrella, what happened? I got wet. Why? Because I was no longer under his protection. When you and I choose to go against his sovereign will, his providential care, then you and I are facing that rebellion. We're facing the judgment of God. Now, the judgment of God isn't always a lightning bolt. The judgment of God is just simply, I'm pulling my hand of protection from over you. What we see in Solomon's life, what we see in these other kings in the northern kingdom and also in the southern kingdom, we're seeing, unfortunately, these kingdoms, these kings making decisions to say, I am not going to place myself nor my kingdom under the authority of God. When you and I can't look at Genesis 1:1 and say God created the heavens and the earth and understand that in everything under heaven and earth, everything there is God's, then we start to unfortunately debate the fact, is God truly God? Is he truly sovereign? You see, you have to settle that issue in your heart. You have to settle that issue in your life so that you too will be what? Obedient to what God wants you to do. When we study through the kings this weekend, you will find people, unfortunately, who have decided we are going to step away from the authority. We are going to step away from the umbrella, and we are going to unfortunately have to absorb what God is going to bring into our life or allow into our lives because we've stepped away from his authority. First and Second Kings, wonderful, wonderful books. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot about relationship between you and God. Can you truly trust God? Naaman was a man who had trouble truly trusting God and what God had to say. So come back, please join us on Sunday, and you will find the answers to these questions. Amen. I'm hoping that you're enjoying these little detours as we kind of trek along off-road, and please let us know. Be blessed this week.